Hey, what's up? So, after uploading a video on which tank is superior between the Abrams and the Scorpion, it's fairly safe to say that some weren't entirely pleased with my determination that due to its 90mm gun and some armor issues and whatnot, that the Scorpion was inferior to the M1A2 Abrams. However, that is when Halo Canon, whose channel I often watch on my phone, asked if I could look at the M1A2 versus the M820 Scorpion tank, citing its larger cannon. And this intrigued me, so I looked into it and I determined that the M1A2 versus the M820 isn't enough because the M820 packs a 150mm electrothermal chemical smoothbore cannon. And while 30mm doesn't seem like a whole lot, in the world of tanks it is, especially when you look at the advanced propellant system and the firing system of the M820. So I did some more digging and I found a tank in the Halo universe that's a little bit more aligned with the M1A2, and that would be the M850 or M850 Grizzly. So once and for all, I want to clear the great tank debate, at least for myself, and I'm going to be looking at the M1A2 versus both the M820 and the M850. Now I want to be clear, and to make it easier to explain, I'll be referring to the M850, even though it's the Grizzly as part of the Scorpion tank family. It's literally just to make it easier to digest rather than Grizzly, Scorpion. It's just a little bit easier. I also want to, before we get started, make it known that the Grizzly and the M820 have absolutely no armor information, so I'm going to end up supplementing gaps in a lot of their information, including the armor, with that of known information on the M808 Scorpion. So this is it. Fair warning, I hope to keep this under 20 minutes, but it's going to be long because I'm going to make this as detailed as possible. It's going to be my definitive take on it, and that's it. So as before, without a dedicated game or source of lore detailing the armor abilities of the UNSC, I'll have to make some assumptions and some guesses as to what the tanks would or would not be capable of. And can I just say how awesome it would be for them to give us a Halo game where we're the operator of a Scorpion fighting the Coveys. Alright, let's get started. The logical place to start would be with the only one of the three tanks that's actually a real tank and therefore has more information out there. For those who didn't watch the first video on the M1A2 versus the M808, don't worry, this isn't going to be a summary of the Abrams. In fact, I'm going to go into a little bit greater detail in hopes of coming to some sort of conclusion on this matter. However, I will say this right now, and as before, it's the same thing. I'm not going to use the scapegoat that it's a future tank, referring to the Scorpions, and so it must be more powerful, more advanced, better armor. That's just a scapegoat I'm not willing to attach myself to. I'm going to go off of pure fact. I mean, that's just how it's going to go. But it also doesn't mean that I'm going to ignore the fact that some aspects of the Scorpion tanks might be more advanced due to being from the future. And I will accommodate that by crediting it with points such as a boost in firepower or armor, when and where I can reasonably attribute a value to a quality held by the Scorpions. Is everyone ready? Okay, here we go. The M1A2 is not a small vehicle, coming in at 12 feet wide, 8 feet high, and just over 32 feet long. With that size comes some serious weight, and this beast ends up tipping the scales at 71.2 short tons. Despite all that, for its size and weight, the Abrams is actually nimble like a powerful athlete, powered by a Honeywell AGT 1500C multi-fuel jet turbine engine. The Abrams ends up having 1,500 horsepower, capable of propelling this 70-ton beast at just over 40 miles an hour. That type of horsepower does come at a cost, making the tank guzzle fuel, and ends up with a relatively small operational range of 265 miles. The significant drawback for fuel economy aside, for a 70-ton tank, the Abrams is fairly agile, at least for a main battle tank. I'm not saying it's the most agile MBT in the world, just simply it's an agile tank. Since the last video, I did some more looking into it, and while the exact makeup and thickness of the armor for the Abrams is a secret, what I did find is the openly known information about the consistency of the Abrams multi-layer armor. The outer shell consists of steel. Beneath that is a layer of ceramic armor. Beneath that is a layer of depleted uranium armor. And beneath that is a layer of Kevlar to protect the crews from spalling or other metal fragments entering the cabin of the vehicle. The Abrams is certainly a sturdy and very tough tank, and from what I have found, no Abrams have been knocked out by an enemy tank. Abrams have been lost before, but not by an enemy tank, which is an important distinction. Despite that fact, Abrams are, for the most part, designed with crew survivability in mind, complete with blast doors on the ammo storage to direct any ammo cooking off from a hit to literally blow upwards and out the blast doors as a measure to prevent the force of the blast going through the blast-proof cabin door and into the crew compartment. Even though the Abrams has some of the toughest armor ever put on a modern fighting vehicle, the multiple layers of armor can then be complemented with armor upgrades like explosive reactive armor, or ERA, which is literally covering the tank in explosives to add to the protection afforded to the crew. Basically, the way it works is for the tank to be covered in vulnerable spots with blocks of explosives encased in a steel housing. When struck by an incoming round, the explosives will detonate and will use the force of the explosion to sap the energy of the incoming projectile, giving it less penetrative power. But even then, without the ERA upgrades, protection of the M1A2 varies. It has a frontal turret armor protection estimate of 940 to 960 millimeters for Sabo, and 1,320 to 1,620 versus Heat. The Glacius armor has a protection estimate of 560 to 590 millimeters for Sabo, and 510 to 1050 versus Heat, and the lower front hull has a protection estimate of 580 to 650 millimeters versus Sabo, and 800 to 970 versus Heat. Now, I know that's a lot of numbers and weird words and acronyms, but the point is none of it's indicative of a tank that can be easily penetrated. Because the M820 Scorpion has an upgraded firing system and an auto-loaded cannon, I'm not only going to give a rundown of the Abrams primary weapon system, but I'm also going to explain how the Abrams fires its main gun to the best of my knowledge and understanding. The primary armament of the M1A2 Abrams tank is a 120mm M256 smoothbore cannon, firing a number of projectiles, but most notably heat, which means high explosive anti-tank. And it is basically a shaped charge that, to my understanding, has a sensor in the nose, and upon impact with the target, ignites the explosives and that superheat the copper lining and compress it into a jet of molten copper that reaches speeds up to 25 times the speed of sound. The heat round is eventually going to be replaced by the AMP if it already hasn't been, which is a more versatile but still high explosive round. The Abrams also carries a tank killer round, the M829A3 armor piercing fin stabilized discarding Sabo, or simply Sabo for short. It can be pronounced Sabot or Sabo, or people call it all kinds of things. Anyway, when fired, the round will discard the Sabo used to keep it aligned properly in the barrel, and then with a small cross section it travels at tremendous speeds reaching 3,500 miles per hour. Keeping it stable in the air, the penetrator rod has fins. The round works by having a dense metal core, typically made of depleted uranium or tungsten. Upon impact, the nose collapses, leaving the dense dart to penetrate the armor, hitting with such force as to have a fluid behavior of the armor and releasing fragments on the inside once it is penetrated. While determining the penetration of a Sabo round is often difficult to do because modern day tanks are not simply made of steel and rather have multiple materials, estimates of a Sabo penetration hover around 700 to 800 millimeters of solid armor at 2 kilometers. That means that at 2 kilometers it's estimated a Sabo can penetrate up to 31.49 inches of armor for those who are metrically deficient. Complementing the powerful main gun is a computer firing and targeting control system that basically reads what the tank is doing across multiple different aspects, such as terrain effects, making the hull move one way or up or back or forwards, and automatically adjusting the gun in real time to keep it on target, reading the speed of the tank, range to the target, and other important external factors, and computing it with the known ballistic data on the round selected to adjust the gun accordingly so that rounds land where the gunner is aiming. This advanced computer gives the Abrams an astonishing first round kill rate. The process of firing an Abrams, simplified and explained to the best of my understanding and knowledge on the subject, is that the loader hits a knee switch, activating the blast door and exposing the round. In the ready rack, the loader removes the selected round and releases a knee switch, allowing the blast door to close while simultaneously flipping the round and placing it on the breech block. The loader, in a fluid motion, shoves the round into the barrel, and once completely in the barrel, the breech block will rise up and close. The loader then takes its position to the left of the main gun and raises the arming lever, making it possible for the gun to fire. The commander selects a target and orders the gunner to engage. The gunner, who squeezes the trigger, or in the event of a misfire, will crank the manual firing handle, also sometimes known as the master blaster. Either way, it sends an electrical current to the primer of the round that ignites the propellant and the combustible shell casing, sending the round down and out the barrel. The gun will recoil into the tank, albeit dampened by the tank's recoil management system, and then ejects the stub, which is all that's left of the round. The stub will deflect downward off the stub plate, and the loader will disarm the gun by pushing the arming lever down, and the breech block will open. From there, the process is repeated until all threats are neutralized or the tank has expended all its ammunition. Provided it transitions from target to target smoothly and gets on target quickly, the theory is that the Abrams can fire a shell every 4 seconds. Now, you might have noticed that positions were mentioned. Positions like driver, loader, gunner, commander. That is because the Abrams will split up the tasks among 4 crew members. 1 drives, 1 loads and arms the gun, 1 fires the gun, and 1 is in charge of the entire tank. The crew system for a tank dates back to the early days of tanks and proves to be an effective way for a tank to be as effective as it possibly can. I feel like I've explained the Abrams to a fair level of detail, so I'm now going to transition to the Scorpions, and I say this because, with the exception of armament, I intend to treat the M820 and the M850 as the same tank from a mobility and armor standpoint. There might be subtle differences, like when you look at the lighter weight of the M820 versus the weight of the M850, which could be indicative of thinner armor, and the fact that the M850 has 2 cannons. But due to the shallow lore and details surrounding the Scorpion tank family, I have little other choice. Despite being 2 tanks in the overall Scorpion tank family, they do vary in size and weight, but both are between 30 and 40 feet long, they both are 28 feet wide, and they both are between 19 and 24 feet high. As I said before, they do vary in weight, with the M850 coming in at 71.4 tons and the M820 weighing less than half that at 34.9 tons. The engine and engine horsepower are unknown for both, but the M850 has a top speed of 43 miles per hour, so it would be reasonable to assume that the M820 could be significantly faster, provided it has the same power pack, and given the reduction in weight, it probably could reach speeds of 80 to 90 miles per hour. More than likely, engineers and military officials would have the top speed governed down to 45 or 50 miles an hour to save on wear and tear for the tracks, road wheels, sprockets, and suspension elements. With all that said, both tanks still operate on 4 independently operated track pods. The armor of the M850 and the M820 is not specified at this time, so I have no choice but to assume that it is the same makeup of armor as the M808 and is outfitted with a ceramic titanium armor. But like the M808, the specifics are unknown, so I don't know if the ceramic titanium armor is a ceramic titanium composite, and then sheets of solid titanium, or another form of ceramic, and then sheets of solid titanium. None of this is known, nor is it known if it's a titanium shell with ceramics underneath that, and then titanium sheets beneath that. Along with all those issues, it's also not explained how thick any of this is. So when you consider that the tank has to have space underneath the surface for fuel tanks, the engine, the transmission, the drive systems, the linkage to each of the track pods, cables, driver space that can fit a Spartan in armor, air purification systems, computer systems, and more, you can see is how a need for internal equipment limits how much armor can be there and how thick the armor can be. With that, the thicker the armor, the heavier it is. As a result, I have to find a balance of how much armor and what kind of armor. Titanium is always going to be titanium, and without specification to tell me if it's alloyed with other metals to provide a stronger armor, I have to decide that on my own. I determined that looking at the size of the Scorpion, that I would estimate a combination of high-grade titanium plates and ceramic protection as 2 separate layers. I'm going to give the armor a 50% boost because while metal alloys will likely always be metal alloys, I will accommodate that it's the future people and concede that ceramics could have a different and more effective process that produces a more effective ceramic. So I will say that 8 inches of titanium and ceramic armor could be equal to approximately 16 inches of armor to penetrate. Maybe the biggest issue with the Scorpion armor is the design itself. Tanks use angled armor because the angled armor is good at deflecting shells and increases the overall rating of the armor. And the Scorpion angles, based off of eyeballing them, seem inadequate in some areas and almost non-existent in others. It's a cool design, but also offers even more optimal conditions for an M1A2 to penetrate it. More troubling than that, the driver's position is not completely inside the tank. The hatch either drops down or slides over the driver, who looks out through holes in the hatch that are filled with ballistic glass and not through a periscope system. Even if I afforded this glass extra ballistic protection to account for the tank being from the future, I cannot reasonably believe that this thin hatch and ballistic glass could stop a round that can penetrate an estimated 30 inches of armor. This design flaw means that even if the Scorpion had a hull and turret armor that was 40 inches thick, all an Abrams would have to do was start to target the driver's hatch, and they would knock it out, and more than likely, actually almost completely certainly, kill the operator. This is a significant design flaw in the Scorpion tank family. The armament of the M820 and the M850 are vastly different, and happens to be the primary difference between the two tanks. The M820 has a 150mm M990 electrothermal chemical smoothbore main gun. That's a mouthful, I know. But basically, the new Scorpion has an electrothermal chemical cannon, or ETC for short. An ETC, really simply put, is a gun that uses a plasma cartridge to ignite and control the ammunition's propellant. ETC increases the performance of conventional propellants while also allowing for more advanced propellants to be used and should achieve a higher velocity. While this seems like 500 years in the future Halo tech, actually ETCs have been developed since the 1980s and have been tested with a 120mm gun producing nearly 17 megajoules of energy at the muzzle. The advanced firing system aside, the biggest asset for the M820 is its 150mm projectile. That's a big projectile, nearly the 155mm of modern-day artillery. Without information on the type of shells the M820 fires, I can only assume that's probably more often than not heat rounds and maybe some sort of tungsten sabot round. The M850 has two 120mm M310 cannons mounted side by side and uses a traditional firing method more like the tanks of today. The M850 Grizzly would be the Halo counterpart to the M1A2 from main gun size, weight, and speed. The M850, like the M820 and the M808, has an auto-loading system that handles all the heavy lifting and fires a round every few seconds and then discards the shell out the tank. Basically, the way an auto-loading system works is that ground crews, before the tank's in battle, will load the tank's internal magazine, and then when fired, the tank on its own will discard the shell, and then the magazine itself will load the next round into the gun. Auto-loading systems are effective, but generally speaking, when you're talking about large caliber weapons like tanks, they don't carry many rounds in the magazine because there's just not enough space for it. Like the M820, I assume that the primary weapon of the M850 is some sort of heat round with a shape charge and maybe some type of tungsten penetrator sabot. I assume that both the M850 and the M820 and even the M808 have some sort of fire control computer, but I'm not sure about the effectiveness of this computer due to a scene from Halo the Flood where the M808s were struggling to take out targets like a Wraith and elites commanding a battle. They eventually did, but only after several shots, and I'm not sure if that's indicative of a faulty fire control computer or user error. Either way, to be fair to the M1A2, that has to be accounted for, that the Scorpion tank family doesn't have a great first hit kill track record. Despite being physically larger than the Abrams, the Scorpion tanks are operated entirely by one person, who is linked to a neural network and handles both the driving of the tank and then the acquisition of a target and subsequent termination of the target. So finally, what does all this mean, and where does everyone stand? Well, that's a lot of info. So I'm going to do what I can to break it up into categories like speed and maneuverability, practicality, general flaws, and then armor and armament, and then offer a definitive conclusion. When it comes to speed and maneuverability, the M1A2 and the M850 are essentially the same. They have a top speed between 40 and 45 miles an hour, and the M820, being significantly lighter, could potentially be significantly faster. But as I said, it's probably governed down to somewhere around 50 miles an hour. From a maneuverability standpoint, they're all able to perform fairly tight turns for a large combat vehicle, and all three can turn in place. From a practicality standpoint, the Abrams is heavy and it chugs through fuel. It's likely that the Scorpions are not all that eco-friendly either, but probably have better fuel economy than an Abrams. However, the Scorpion loses a lot of points for being too large to do a lot of practical warfare. An Abrams could easily gain the advantage on a Scorpion by battling it and then drawing it into a fight in tight or confined spaces. The largest impractical feature of the Scorpion is the fact that one person operates the entire tank. In a world where it's painfully obvious how hard it is to drive and do much of anything else, it's hard for me to believe that a single person would be an effective way to operate a Scorpion tank, especially while moving and engaging targets. It would be more likely that the tank would have to move, locate a target, stop, engage, and move again, and that doesn't allow for the tank to be very effective. On the other hand, the M1A2 doesn't need to do that. It doesn't need to stop to engage. The M1A2, by having a crew of 4 people and breaking up the responsibilities, can fire on the move and would be more effective in a dynamic battle type situation where they can't stop. Even if the M850 and the M820 have the neural network that the M808 has, I stand by my statement that precisely driving and firing a tank would be like trying to precisely run an intricate obstacle course while texting, and doing both to a high degree of precision. In other words, it'd be fairly difficult. General flaws are very much tit for tat when it comes to these machines. Like with the M1A2 versus the M808, if an Abrams loses a track, it's game over. The tank cannot move until the track is fixed. In a tank battle, that leaves it a stationary target to be picked off by a Scorpion. The Scorpion, with 4 independent track pods, each with its own drive sprocket attached to a final drive, would in theory be able to lose 2 of their 4 tracks and still be able to limp home, assuming that the tracks were not lost on the same side. However, the Scorpion is more than twice as tall and twice as wide as the Abrams, and when designing a tank, the silhouette is generally considered. The larger the tank, the bigger the target. And in a world of tanks that are becoming more and more first-round kill vehicles, the larger the target, the greater the chance of getting hit. Along with that, the Scorpion is easier to spot and easier to hit in immobilizing areas, specifically because it and they are larger. Similar to how the real Tiger 131 was captured by having its gun and turret immobilized by incoming rounds and then being abandoned. The Scorpion, due to its size, makes these areas easier to spot, target, and engage. A Scorpion tank with a turret that won't traverse and a gun that won't elevate is at a severe disadvantage, almost to the point of helplessness. Now granted, an M1A2 is susceptible to the same types of hits that will immobilize it, but because it's smaller, it's logically going to be a harder target to hit. Armor and armament, this is a hard one to really nail down. So let's start with the easy stuff first. A single hit from a 150mm main gun round from the M820, that's likely going to severely damage the M1A2 or outright knock it out due to just the sheer size of the shell and the velocity of the round achieved through the ETC process and potentially higher grade propellants. Now, depending on the round, it's a toss-up to whether or not an M850 can take out an Abrams, at least in one hit. Abrams have been taken out through friendly fire and or intentionally destroyed after being immobilized. So the likelihood of the M850 penetrating the Abrams armor is fair. And that goes up when you consider the ability of the M850 to fire 2 rounds at once, or each barrel a fraction of a second delayed, allowing the first round to impact, and even if it doesn't penetrate completely through the armor, it would compromise the structural integrity of the armor and give the follow-up shot that's coming a fraction of a second later a higher likelihood of penetrating the armor. With that said, the Abrams stands in a very good chance of hitting and penetrating the Scorpion tank when you consider the fire control systems, its ability to penetrate up to 800mm of armor while on the move at 2 kilometers away. So even with the padded armor value attributed to the Scorpion, the 16 inches of armor only eats up about half of the estimated penetrating power of the Abrams, and even if you gave some wiggle to that because of the ceramics and whatnot, the odds of it adding another 16 inches of just stopping power is unlikely. Then you have the Abrams. which is capable of being fitted with armor upgrades and using ERA to stop or dramatically slow an incoming shell so it does less damage to the armor of the tank. And Scorpions and Grizzlies have no such record of ever using that, which is a significant difference in armor and a significant difference in which vehicle would be better choice for the battlefield and which one would win. So, to sum things up, both the M850 and the M820 Scorpion tanks could knock out or completely destroy an Abrams, but an Abrams could also be more than reasonably assumed to have more than enough power to do the same back, with a crew to break up the tasks and a smaller silhouette and overall smaller size, giving it a greater ability to engage a Scorpion in tight spaces, along with accounting for the Scorpion's major design flaws regarding armor slope and the driver's hatch. I would say that the Abrams is still the superior tank design, not because it can't be destroyed by these two tanks, because it certainly can be, but rather because its firepower makes it a significant threat to the theorized armor of the Scorpion. Combine that with the crew making the tank as efficient as possible, high chances of survivability even when critically hit in areas like ammo storage, and the fact that it is the smaller of the three tanks, the Abrams logically seems to be the superior tank option based on the info on hand. And if you had to pick one to ride along on during this tank battle, the Abrams would likely be your best chance of survival for reasons mentioned. But hey, you know what? That's just my opinion. You let me know down below what you think, and if you think I missed anything, and until next time, good night. By the way, for anyone interested, I did include links on specifics of most of this info down below in the description.